That is kind of when a little bit before that would be when Svenya kicks in and she takes over once the offer goes firm or conditions are fulfilled. And she really takes over and talks to you about what you should expect going forward. Now, something that's important to know about our process here today and right now, firstly, for those who I didn't get to say hello to, hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us here. But what I did want to say is this is Svenya, my real estate lawyer. This is Sandra, my mortgage broker. Svenya, not to say we're not all busy, super busy, lots going on. She does have to take off. So though in the process, Svenya actually comes a little later on, we are going to actually start off with her and do things a little opposite because traditionally, Sandra would be your first stop. You get your pre-approval, you come to me, we go shopping, then you see Svenya. But I would love to take this opportunity to introduce you to Svenya and just talk about what happens in the process. Where do you come in? What's important for a first-time home buyer to know?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So thank you, Chaunyce, for introducing me. Yes, so I practice real estate, and as you said, it's like a three-step, broadly speaking, three-step process. Goes from the real estate agent to the mortgage broker, all the way to the lawyer. So I essentially receive the firm binding agreement of purchase and sale, right? So that is our foundation of the transaction. So I find that this is number one. This is our Bible. You have to carefully review that. All conditions that have been met, first of all, satisfactory. All the documentation has to be in place. Review all schedules. That's very important. Oftentimes you see a lot of clauses that are very important in the schedule A or B. So that being said, I received that firm agreement, and I sort of like to review it, myself first. Then I contact the client, and I like to put what I call, it's like an engagement letter, essentially, just to make the client aware as to all the steps, because there's 1,000 steps in that process. Yes, we have a closing date, but in between, there's so much going on, and it becomes very overwhelming for first-time home buyers, especially, right? For someone who's not familiar with the process. So I like to spell it all out. First, of course, have a chat over the phone, but again, it's a lot of information. I like to put it in writing. Clients can go always back to that letter, review it. So the way I break it down, first, I sort of give them a map. This is what's going to happen at what point. Okay, closer to the closing date, this is what's going to happen. In the initial stage, this is what's going to happen. Of course, yes, title search, that's sort of my liability, my responsibility here to assure that title is okay, so client doesn't have to worry about it. Of course, if there's any issues, I address that. So title search is, let's say, off the shoulders. The clients don't have to worry. So that being said, there are essential matters to clients. I would say financial matters are one of them, such as land transfer tax, legal fees, all the disbursements that are involved in a transaction, right? I noticed that a lot of first-time home buyers really anxious. They don't really understand the process. They don't understand when, how, why do they have to bring that amount of money, right? That's why I like to put that nice kind of essay, because it is like 5 pages, but it's really clear and it's broken down by topics. So it's really straightforward when you actually read it. I talk about title insurance. That's another topic that's very foreign for many. So as I said, those financial matters, that's something that I really, really like to address because, of course, that is important, right? Clients, and no one likes to be really surprised by that. So my initial conversation always starts with, of course, are you moving in to the subject property? Are you a first-time home buyer? Because it actually matters. Yes.
Sorry, why does it matter? Like, I know the answers to this, but I think first-time home buyers may not know why some of the things that you just said makes a difference. So why does it matter if they move in or not?
Right. So Ministry of Finance basically provides a list of qualifications as to the first-time home buyer rebate. So it's not that you never own the property, okay? So you can get that rebate for a first-time home buyer. So actually, it's not that easy. You do have to qualify for that first-time home buyer rebate. In order to qualify for that first-time home buyer rebate, first of all, you cannot ever have owned a property anywhere in the world, anywhere, not only in Canada. And that is something that is very confusing for a lot. And I know, unfortunately, that's the way it works. But if you have owned a property in France, Spain, wherever, unfortunately, you're right away not eligible for that rebate. Okay, so that's where I start. First of all, have you ever owned the property? No? Fine, let's check if you qualify, right? So in order to qualify for that rebate, you do have to occupy the premises as your primary place of residence. If this is an investment property for rental purposes, you will not be eligible for this rebate. And Ministry of Finance conducts random spot audits, and I always warn clients, if you're not moving in, you're not eligible. And it's really serious because the fines could be outrageous. So I always warn clients that in order to take advantage of this first-time home buyer rebate, sure, why not? Of course, it's a great opportunity, but you do have to qualify for that, right? So number one, you never owned a property anywhere in the world. You are moving into the subject property that you are purchasing. You are a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada. And one trick here is in terms of spouses, okay? Because I often get these questions. Well, actually, Sandra, this is something at the very beginning we mentioned. So this is the case. Well, my husband, he owns a property. I don't. So I want my rebate. Well, I would give it to you if I could, but I can't. I cannot because you're already disqualified. The way the legislation is drafted, if your spouse owns the property and did not dispose of that property before entering into a marriage with you, you are ineligible, unfortunately. Yes.
Just because I want to make sure to get some questions out there. I'm not sure if anyone has questions. Feel free to ask if you do.
Yes, please.
What if you do not go into the purchase with your spouse? Are you then eligible?
Well, no, you're not. Okay. Because you're still a spouse.
Okay.
You're still a spouse. Yes. Okay. So, and then the thing is, well, you're moving into the property, right? You're moving into the property. So under the assumption with your husband, oftentimes, so that would even, that's very dangerous. And no, you're not eligible. You're not. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. As long as you're a spouse, so you're legally married, unfortunately, you don't get that rebate.
Got it. Okay.
If that spouse did not dispose of the property before entering. So let's say, today I'm not married, I own several properties, but then I sell them one by one, right? And then I enter into a marriage and my husband is a first-time home buyer. Well, he can take advantage of that rebate because I disposed of all my properties before entering into marriage, right?
Yeah. We have a question, if that's okay.
Yes.
Is it only in Canada to buy the house? Hello, everyone. Is it only in Canada to buy the house?
So in terms of, I'm not quite sure if I'm understanding the question, but in terms of my legal practice, I'm able to convey properties only actually not in Canada, but only in Ontario, because we have provincial and federal law. So provincial law works on provincial basis. So each province has its own legislation, its own laws and regulations, and we are licensed as lawyers only in the province of Ontario. So I would be only able, if that is the intention of the question, I would be only able to purchase on behalf of the clients or sell or refinance only in Ontario.
Got it. Okay, perfect. That answers the question.
Right. So I actually had a client, sorry, just because that's actually a valid question. I had a client contact me and she said, please review this this agreement of purchase and sale. It's a new construction condominium. Okay, two agreements. I open it up. One is in Alberta, one is in Quebec. And I call my client. I said, you know what? I would love to, but it's outside of my jurisdiction. I'm not licensed there. So she said, really? I didn't know that. So yeah, because the way we have our law structured is definitely quite unique. It's not unified like in different countries. Let's say in Europe, it's all unified and it's one law, one legislation. That's basically it. So yes, so only in Ontario. Of course, you want to purchase a house in Alberta, you have to retain a lawyer there.
Perfect. Okay, so can we keep it going? Can I ask some fees? What are people, when you're getting into the market, you're a first-time home buyer, you don't really know how much should I be saving for legal fees and closing costs? Can we discuss that?
Absolutely. So in terms of fees and disbursements, I always try to put as much as possible. Of course, at the initial stage, it's really difficult, not in terms of my legal fee. I do spell out my legal fee, and it really all depends, right? If it's an investment property, there's a little bit more involved, a little bit extra documentation, usually required by banks, right? Due to the tenancy issue, right? That matter. So I do spell out my fees, of course, subject to tax, to HST, then disbursements as much as possible. The big one, land transfer tax. Then, of course, we have provincial land transfer tax, but please keep in mind, we also have Toronto municipal land transfer tax if we are purchasing in Toronto. So if you're purchasing in North York, that means that it's also Toronto. You are subjected to that double taxation. Believe it or not, and I don't blame anyone, it is very confusing. Clients don't know that. So it was actually my client who was very surprised. He was not aware of that if he purchased in Toronto, there's twice as much he has to purchase, although he was a first-time home buyer. That did alter his choices. So once I advised him, he ultimately decided to purchase in Toronto, but it's always nice when you make an informed decision. You are aware, right? So that's why it's very important, the location. Anything in Toronto, remember, ×2. Outside of Toronto, it's one provincial tax, land transfer tax, based on the purchase price. So that would vary. Plus, of course, the first-time home buyer rebate, if applicable. So I spell out my legal fees, that big land transfer tax, disbursement. I can always estimate, for a purchase transaction, it really depends. But I try to say, you know what, if it's a complex title search and there's a lot of instruments that I have to review, meaning download, because it's a governmental fee. It's not my fee. It's the government that charges us per instrument, per parcel. It's it may be very complex. I have to do abutting land search, so all the land surrounding that lot, believe it or not, it may be very hectic. Yes.
I'm so sorry. Okay. Really simply, just in case anyone didn't understand a few things, disbursement, title search.
Actually, disbursements relate only to the transactional disbursement, meaning, photocopying, postage, fax, title search, registration fees, only those out-of-pocket expenses. So those are in addition to legal fees. So that's why I always like to break it up and say, you know what, this is the legal fee. And then I don't want to have anyone surprised why is there extra $500? Well, there's registration fee per instrument. So if you're getting a mortgage, it's going to be at least 2 instruments, right? We have to transfer your ownership and register that mortgage. So it's 2, right? If there's additional documents, each document costs around $80 to round it up. So disbursements are my out-of-pocket expenses, office expenses that I have to incur on behalf of the client. Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Can you just summarize what is land or title search? When you have to do a title search, what are you doing?
So title search is basically conducting a thorough examination, I would say, of the land at the land registry office, but it's all digital. Okay, so of course, with very, very few exceptions, I have not encountered yet that they're, have not been automated, but almost everything has been automated. It's all in the electronic system. So in that electronic system, we search for the property, and we sort of receive a list of all activities on the property. Of course, there's to a point, because if there's some very, very old activities, they may not be detected, but at least the most current and the most recent ones are there. So you will find who is the current owner, who did they buy from, for how much. You will find any easements, rights of way, any registered mortgages, encumbrances, liens. So I have to examine that in order to determine that you, as my client, the buyer, because it's the buyer's lawyer that always conducts that title search to provide good and marketable title to the property, I have to make sure that everything is right. I have to examine everything and make sure that my client is obtaining actually what he or she bargained for, right? So there are issues, trust me, there's work orders registered, there's mortgages, which mortgages are not really an issue, it's resolvable, but it's still an issue that has to be resolved, has to be addressed, cannot be missed. My clients can, of course, purchase the property subject to that mortgage, but of course, subject to paying out that mortgage by the sellers, right? So there's certain documentation that I have to request before the closing date from the seller's lawyer. So that's why it's very important to check the property and examine all activities, what's happening, and what has to be deleted from the property. So those mortgages belonging to the seller, or even for some reason, some old mortgages belonging to the previous seller that for some reason were missed and never discharged, it happens once in a blue moon, that all has to be cleaned and dealt with. If there's some expired documents, sometimes you find some expired documents. I like to clean up the property. Why would you have an easement that, expired 5 years ago? I like to clean it up. I don't like any mess there. I'd like to provide that title to the client nice and clean, basically. So that's the title search. It could be very complex because we have this extremely, extremely confusing Planning Act in Ontario that has been amended probably 50 times. I'm not even exaggerating. I think it was implemented in the 50s, and ever since it's been amended constantly, including just recently. But of course, for the better, but because of all the confusion there, that's why they have to keep changing and adding and updating. So Planning Act is something that could become the biggest issue of all times. if there is a contravention. So I'm not going to talk about it because it's very complex, but if I have to do a title search around your lot, that could be very time consuming too, right? So it's always, speaking of that closing date, it's always good to give that lawyer some time to, examine everything and make sure everything is in compliance with the legislation, all that. So title search is basically that. That's examination, thorough examination of all activity on the property. And clients don't realize, but it's really, really sometimes very time consuming. And before we even get to the stage of signing, that's my initial work, I would say, on the file. I have to address any issues with the other lawyer as well to clean it up.
After you give the initial deposit, when do you have to give more money? When does an exchange of money then have to leave your hand again in the process?
Right. So you're saying between myself and the client?
Correct.
Yes. So again, in that letter, I always say, few days before, you will need to provide me with those funds. And that being said, it has to be before the closing date because those are closing funds. So what I do, I give a lump sum to the client. I tell them, this is the full amount, the total amount you need to provide me with before the closing date. It could be even on the morning of the closing date, but I don't like that because what if for some reason the bank puts the money on hold? There's some issues. So I always recommend at least 1 day prior to closing. But I always, of course, try to put the numbers together. Of course, assuming I have the mortgage instructions that tell me exactly what I'm getting, right? Assuming I have it, let's say a week before, I put all the numbers together. I submit it to my client, show a breakdown, add it all up and say, this is what is outstanding and I will need this amount. And make it easier for the clients. I give them my void check. They could go to any branch of iBank with TD, and just either direct deposit that money order or certified check that they order from their bank. It's not really complicated. They just go to their bank. They go to or if they're at TD, it's just the same location. And they deposit it directly to my bank account. I give them one sheet with my bank account information, or they could wire. That's another option from their bank. I also give them my information, or they could bring it to me directly. So I give them specific instructions how the check has to be written, for how much, and why for that much. So I try to do it at least about a week before because I can appreciate the stress and the uncertainty. People don't like to wait, and I don't either. I'd rather do it earlier than later. I don't like to leave anything to the last minute because I'm try to be organized and everything in order. So yeah, so I try as fast as possible. So then it's really up to the client when they decide to put the money into my trust account, because it has to go to the trust account, but no later than the day before the closing. No later. And then of course, on the day of closing, I receive the mortgage money. I should have my client's money already, and I disperse it on the day of closing. Yes, so that's the process. The day before the closing, I always tell the client, please bring the funds.
Perfect. If you haven't already. Yes.
Latest. Yes, latest. Because it just makes it more smooth. Yes.
Absolutely. Sandra, I think I understand that you had a question.
Yeah, I was just curious from your perspective, because you're the one who handles this all the time, is the title insurance. If you could just talk a little bit about what title insurance is, because I think it comes up on every file now, correct?
Very good question. Yes. And I actually dedicate like 2 pages out of the 5 or 6 from in my initial letter talking about it, because it's a relatively new concept, right? It's a new product. I don't know, it's been maybe for a decade or a little bit extra, maybe 12, 15 years, not that long around. So yes, title insurance cannot be confused with home insurance. It's a separate product. Title insurance is to protect your title. So if there are any issues with your title, more specifically pertaining to fraud, that happens more and more often. Believe it or not, fraudulent mortgages get registered on title constantly. Constantly. The fraud rate just increased significantly over the last years. So if there's some fraud activity, potentially, if the sellers lied that they paid property taxes, because they swear, they have a document, they submit it to me, they tell me, yes, we paid, statement of adjustments, we paid. No, you didn't pay, actually. My clients received a bill after the closing date stating that there's arrears, let's say in $5,000, pay it. They disappear. Okay, title insurance steps in, and title insurance will insure you. The same with water arrears. So that is extremely beneficial. So, but speaking of this title insurance, just to give you an idea, it's not mandatory, but it's not recommended to purchase a property without that title insurance. It's very risky, and not every lawyer will go ahead and agree to that. In addition to that, it's not only title insurance for the homeowner. There's a second policy. There's two policies. You have to think about it as two separate products. There's a title insurance policy for the homeowner, the buyers, and the title insurance for the bank, for the lender, or rather the lender, okay? It's separate. It's totally separate, because you see, for the home buyer, you purchase it once, and it's not that big of an expense. You purchase it once, and it will last you forever, for as long as you are the owner. It will protect you. If there's any fraud activity in 20 years since when you purchased the property, you're still protected. So it's really, really crucial to have that title insurance. So homeowner policy is not mandatory. And lender policy, sometimes it is mandatory. It's not actually, the majority of times it is mandatory. The bank will say, if you don't obtain title insurance, like, you have no choice. You have to obtain title insurance to protect the bank. We want it. Okay, so that's that. So for homeowner, not mandatory. Lender, most of the times mandatory. And also about this title insurance. So as I said, any title defects, you're protected. Any arrears in taxes, water, you're protected. There's a lot of different things, encroachments. There's a huge list of coverage that, for example, Stewart Title, Chicago Title, those are the companies that will provide you with that. Any defects, basically, any actually also some errors and omissions of lawyers, whether it's the seller's lawyer, let's say something wasn't disclosed, you weren't aware as the buyer about something significant pertaining to your title to the property, you are going to be covered. So that's also something very, very important. I did have another thought about this title insurance, but it just skipped my mind. There's of course exclusions, right? It's not like everything is covered.
So
right.
Just to add what Malcolm just said is, I also know someone who got a bill after closing. Thankfully, he had title insurance and it covered that expense for him.
Right.
Yeah, it's very important.
So this is very important. And I had that many times. Many times I received, the buyers were very upset calling me. Listen, they lied. There's a bill. We received the bill. How come? Okay. So first step, you have to submit it to the seller's lawyer. You have to. Title insurance wants first to be resolved. They want you to resolve it directly with the party, right? If they're not cooperating, fine. You have your correspondence with them in writing, just so you can present it to title insurance. Title insurance has no problems. They will cover you. They will absolutely cover you. So that is important. Title insurance is really, really important. It's not a big expense. Considering sometimes it's like $500, $600, depending on many factors, especially the purchase price. But it's, $600, think about it. Even if you live there for 5 years or 10 years, it's really not that much. And it really provides such a comprehensive, coverage. It's really, really crucial. And I'll tell you, a lot of lawyers will not proceed without title insurance, because okay, the reason why, what I also wanted to mention, the thing is, why it's not mandatory, because you as a lawyer, you could order several searches instead of ordering that title insurance. That being said, these searches will all add up to a bit higher amount than that title insurance policy. That gives you even extra more protection. Okay, so let's say someone tells me, I don't want that title insurance, don't get it, please. And I get the instructions, and let's say I feel comfortable as a lawyer to go ahead and proceed on those bases, then I have to order a tax certificate. It's around $100 already. Order zoning building compliance report, order fire inspection report. There's and many more. There's a list. Okay, so when you add them up, it's actually not even advantageous to any buyer. So that's why. So it's not mandatory. You could substitute, but and then I give you my lawyer's opinion. And how good is my lawyer's opinion? It's only as good up to the closing date. And after that, it's not good, right? Whereas title insurance covers you forever. So very important. Title insurance is super important. I know it's an extra expense for clients, but it's really not that much. And the benefits just prevail.
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
Just a quick question, and I'm not at all trying to quote you. Do you have a range in your mind how much title insurance might be? A range?
You know what? For I could actually even quickly calculate, but for sorry, you disappeared for a second.
Sorry.
For example, for a condominium below $500, 500,000, sorry, I believe it's up to $500, something like that, for a homeowner and lender.
Okay.
Together, something like that. I recall.
Really quickly. So I know before you were saying if you're getting it for yourself, it's a one-time payment. Is that the same thing for a lender? Is it
No.
Okay.
No. So with the lender, it's different. I will just a second before I forget. I just closed the transaction yesterday, and the purchase price was $610, and the title insurance for both, for homeowner and lender, was under $400, and it's a freehold. Okay, so it's not much. And also, actually, it was 500 and change, but I, as a lawyer, receive a discount, 150 on a house. On a condo, only 25, but on a house, 150, and I passed that discount to the client. So it was 388, something like that. So below $400 for both policies. Now, speaking of that second policy, that's really insignificant, right?
Yeah, no,
that's fee. We often spend so much more for, other stuff. And like, this is really, really important. It really is.
Okay.
Speaking of that lender policy. So let's say I'm with Scotiabank today, right? For 5 years. So that policy is valid for as long as you are with Scotia.
Okay.
So if all of a sudden you decide to go to Bank of Montreal or to TD, whatever the case is, you do have to obtain a lender's policy, but that lender's policy will not be that expensive as the combined owners and lenders, of course, because now you're just buying a lender. You never have to buy your owners again. So if you refinance, you just keep refinancing with other banks. Well, you just apply for a lender policy, and then that fee, you have to pay that. It's again $200, $300, depends. If it's a bank, it's roughly something like that, 300, 400. Again, depends on the mortgage principal amount.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Does anyone have any questions?
There's any questions, please?
I know I had one, but once again, the adrenaline of running this seminar, I feel like I totally forgot. But that's kind of the process in a nutshell. Oh, very quickly, status certificate. Why is that important? I've had a few clients that are like, I don't need a lawyer to review a status certificate. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, you can look over the 200-page document and you can see things like the reserve fund and it has $1 million in it. That seems like it would be good, but why is it important to have you actually review it?
Right. So the status certificate could be really important on actually from very different points of view, because one person is going to look at the financial aspect, the majority of people will, but it's not only the case. So that status certificate is basically a document that talks about your unit, per se, your unit specifically, talks about your common expenses, right? So you will have an idea how you have to manage your financial affairs in terms of maintenance fees every single month. So that's the financial aspect of it. Also, the financial aspect of the whole condominium corporation as a whole. Okay, the reserve fund. So that fund is like a savings account. You know, if something breaks, imagine the windows have to be replaced or a roof. That could be very costly. There's some unpredicted expenses, like it happens in life. We know that, right? So you do have to be very mindful to take a look at those numbers and just make sure that in the unfortunate event of, you know, this possibility of something breaking in the building, does the condominium corporation have sufficient funds to cover those issues? So that's a financial aspect. So that is, I would say, very important. Yes.
Sorry, what would happen if they don't have some significant financial funds to be able to cover that?
Right. So that's why it's so important to put that condition, because if someone is not satisfied with the numbers or with any other information, by the way, in the status certificate, they could basically say, you know what, I'm not satisfied. I am not fulfilling this condition. I don't want this. I don't want to go ahead with this transaction. You know, conditions are there for a reason, not just, you know, under like, just let's pretend, let's just put some conditions. No, it's actually, it's a valid condition, and it's very important. I had people decide not to proceed on the basis of the financial, breakdown of either the reserve fund study or also the budget. It was just, there was not sufficient funds for major renovations that were already anticipated in the next few years. So that was very problematic, and they did not go ahead ultimately with the transaction. So it's important to really, you know, you can make a choice based on that review. Whether you're satisfied or you're not satisfied, that will determine if you want to go ahead with this transaction, right? The other thing is that it's not only the financial aspects that are sometimes a deal breaker. I had a client that was not happy about the fact that there were restrictions placed on the balconies, common areas, which is common, but also on visitors, pets. You know, if you have a pet lover, you love pets, you're bringing your dog, but the condominium has strict rules. No pets. You don't want to move into that building, right? You definitely are going to look for something else. And again, with that status certificate, that's why I break it down, my review, put it in writing, split it into financial, but also lifestyle. If you have a pet, it's going to matter to you if there's specific rules pertaining to that prohibition, right? As smoking, another deal breaker. Sometimes we find out that there's actually no parking, even though the seller actually listed that there's a parking spot and there is a dwelling. So you find out in the status certificate, well, there's a parking spot, but it's only exclusive use. So you could use it, but it's not really yours. It's really common elements. It's just exclusive use. No one else can use it, but you know, you don't own it, right? There were situations where actually the agreement stated that there are supposed to be 3 parkings, and in fact there were only 2. That was a deal breaker. So I would say that is significant, because of course the agreement, as much as possible, it's precise, but the seller also misrepresents sometimes. some matters. We know that, right? Whether it's common expenses. I've had that numerous times that they said, well, it's $500. Then we find out from the status certificate, it's actually $680. So the buyer needs to make a at least informed decision. It's up to the buyer if they are satisfied with that increase. But again, you want to know what you're getting yourself into, right? No one likes these kind of surprises. So oftentimes it happens that the common expenses, it's something is incorrect, and those restrictions. There's condominium corporations that will place such strict regulations that it's an overkill, but that's the way they are, and others are more lenient, so it all depends on the preference of every individual, what they are actually looking for. So always put that condition, status certificate. Always do. Right, because I had a client just recently called me. He said, you were right. I insisted not going ahead with that status certificate review. I calculated, I knew there was going to be a special assessment loan. That's another thing. But I didn't anticipate it being so high. It's $40,000. I said, yeah, it's very hard to anticipate, but had you submitted that status certificate for my review, which after all, I had to get that status certificate in order to close the deal anyways. So I saw a bunch of problems with that status certificate, but my client didn't want me to review it. He said, no, it's done. No conditions. I want this property, right? So it happened. So special assessment, I just wanted to warn everyone as well. And legal proceedings in that status certificate. Because just remember, just because you're buying a condominium unit doesn't mean it's just your unit and nothing else matters. Actually, everything in the building matters. Your neighbor's actions may affect yours and vice versa, okay? The management, the way financials are handled by the property management or manager matters. So if there's a legal proceeding pending against the condominium corporation that will not be covered by the condominium insurance, each individual owner will have to pay for that lawsuit, for the loss, of course, in the event, of course, that the condominium corporation loses. So it's a risky situation as well. And special assessments, if you see, and if, let's say I review the financials and I see that, this building is going to have some financial trouble, I tell my clients, you may expect a special assessment. And what it is, it's just a sum of money that each individual owner will be responsible to provide the condominium to the condominium corporation, just because the condominium corporation just fell into some financial difficulties and you have no choice. You have to pay it. So no one really wants to find a bill of $20,000, because things weren't, as long as the client is aware, right? That's what I'm saying. It always goes back to, you're aware, you still want the bill, you still want the unit, but you're just, that there's some issues, but you want it, you're making an informed decision, that's one thing. But if you're purchasing on the basis that, you didn't know and you're fed up because things happen, that's I think very important to sort out. That's why condition always for the status certificate, always.
Agreed.
And I know sellers are pressuring, let's just sell it and it's good. Buyers just get it. But I will insist for every buyer, put that condition.
Well, thank you so much, Svenya. I know you have to take off. Thank you for all your insight, everything you do. And
thank you.
Absolutely. Whenever you got to go, you just take off. We are going to jump over. Is there something that you want to say? Are you okay?
I'll stay 5 more minutes. Yeah. Okay. Just, and then I'll disappear in case there's any other questions in the chat. And yes, I apologize. My schedule is just upside down a little bit these days.
No worries.
But it was a pleasure. If anyone needs to reach out to me, I'm more than happy always to assist. either phone call, email. I'm more than happy to help anyone.